And now for some introductions. So my name is Jolene, and I'll be leading today's webinar with Suzanne Bontempo from the nonprofit Our Water, Our World. I've been with EBMUD's Water Conservation Department for about 7 years, where I put on these webinars. I do a lot of our education and outreach programming, and also help facilitate our landscape rebates. Suzanne?
Thank you, Jolene. My name is Suzanne Bontempo, and I work as an environmental educator, teaching the principles of integrated pest management for sustainability, eco-friendly pest management around the home and garden, and also work as the program manager for Our Water, Our World. I have been working as a professional gardener for over 25 years. I'm an IPM advocate. I'm a Rescape California qualified professional and also Quell certified. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. And here is our agenda. So I'm going to start things off by going over EBMUD's water supply and giving a quick drought update focused on easy actions that we can all do to conserve water. And then we'll give kind of a broad overview about what makes a water-wise garden. What do we mean when we say that? And then we'll get into fall garden maintenance, which includes adjusting your irrigation schedule, building healthy soil, planting, pruning, pest prevention. And then we'll wrap up with information about EBMUD's rebates and our mulch coupons, and then open it up for questions there at the end. So a reminder that if any questions come up, feel free to go ahead and type them in that Q&A box. Okay, so jumping in, where does our water come from? Well, EBMUD's water comes from the McCallamy River, which is 627 square miles of pristine protected watershed. So 90% of our water is from snowmelt, and it supplies up to 325 million gallons of water daily. And I point this out because it means that our water supply really does rely primarily on snowmelt. And we rely on that snow to store water and then refill our reservoirs as it melts throughout the spring and summer. This is a zoomed out picture of the EBMUD water supply, where over on the far right, you can see where the McCallamy River watershed is located. And then raw and untreated water, it's transported 90 miles via 3 aqueducts to the East Bay water treatment plants. And in 2002, the Freeport Regional Water Project was created. You can see that kind of here in the upper middle part of the screen. The Freeport Water Project allows EBMUD to access supplemental Sacramento River water if needed during periods of drought. So we are in a drought right now, but we haven't started purchasing water from Freeport just yet, but are expecting to starting in early October. And then here is the water and wastewater service area. So EBMUD provides water to 1.4 million customers, and then also wastewater treatment services to over 600,000 wastewater customers. It's over 4,000 miles of pipe and servicing 400,000 water meters. So it really is a pretty large production. And I mentioned that, which I'm sure everybody knows, we are in a drought. So East Bay precipitation, that's going to be here locally, it was the driest winter on record. And then in the McCallamy River watershed, where we're expecting snow to store some of that water, it was actually the second driest winter on record. All this means that we're currently in what's been declared a stage 1 drought, asking everybody to come together for a voluntary 10% reduction in water use. So the different drought stages are based on water supply. And if the drought continues, it's possible that we'll enter into one of those higher drought stages where reductions will go from voluntary to mandatory. And this chart here at the bottom, this shows what's called gross water production, and it's comparing water production from 2020 to 2021. Water production is water that's coming out of our treatment facilities, and it's kind of a proxy for water use. So down here, the yellow at the bottom shows the percent change from 2020 to 2021. And you can see that over here in September, production was down almost 7%. So we're pretty close to that 10% reduction goal, which is great. That means that our service area really has done a lot to save water, but we need to keep it up to get to that 10%, especially in the coming months if they continue to be drier than expected. So this graph shows a breakdown of average household water use. And for a single family home, you can see that 66% of water is used indoors, and then 34% is used outdoors. So when we're looking at conservation, how we can help get to that 10%, indoors, water conservation is mainly going to be about making plumbing upgrades or behavior changes. And there are savings that can be achieved indoors, but it's really the outdoor water use where we'll see the biggest impact. And that's because there are some changes that can be made where you'll really save a lot of water, kind of like in this picture here at the bottom that shows it's a green lawn, it has sprinklers, but these sprinklers are actually misting and overspraying the side or the lawn. The water's going onto the street where it just goes down the storm drains and is completely being wasted. So we know that water is precious. It's coming all the way from the Sierras. We want to make sure that it's being used efficiently. But that doesn't mean letting your landscape die. It means just making those upgrades to your irrigation, looking at what plants you're putting in to make sure that it's just being used efficiently for its intended purpose. And that's one reason why we put on these educational webinars focused on water-wise gardening to help get the word out and share some of those water-wise gardening best practices. So we're in a drought. What can you do? Well, indoors and outdoors, you can find and fix leaks. Indoors, you can install efficient devices such as efficient shower heads and sink aerators. There are the behavior changes such as taking shorter 5-minute showers. And then really the big impact is going to be focusing on the landscape. And you might not know, how much water you're actually using outdoors. So I wanted to just remind everybody that as an EBMUD customer, you actually have access to your home water report portal. It's here that you can actually view your water use, pay your bill, get water saving recommendations. You can set up leak alerts, and then you can actually track your seasonal irrigation. So you'll see your water use broken up by month. And so if you see on the graph a big spike during those summer months, most likely that's going to be indicating it's from your irrigation. And that will help you set some of those conservation targets. So you can access your home water report by going to ebmud.com/mywaterinfo. All right, so before I pass things to Suzanne, I just wanted to show a picture here of what is a water-wise garden? What do we mean when we say that? And this picture is showing a kind of typical lawn, and maybe they cut back on irrigation and it's turning kind of dry and brown. So a water-wise garden would transform this into this picture, which is an area that's been mulched to help build healthy soil. And it now has a lot of plant diversity, not only offering color and improving aesthetics, but that plant diversity, in addition to saving water, it's going to offer a lot of other ecological benefits. And we'll be touching on some of that today as well. And so with that, I am going to pass things over to Suzanne.
All right. So let's talk about how to grow a water-wise garden. So it starts with proper watering practices, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a moment. It's going to also include appropriate plant choices. We're going to choose plants, and ideally California natives, that will best fit our microclimate. We're going to prefer and favor perennials over annuals because once perennials are established, they're going to require less care, including less water. We're going to look at creating shade around our properties with trees and large shrubs. We are always going to plant within hydrozones. And what this means is grouping plants together that share similar water needs. Okay. And then from there, I'd like to extend it to also sharing similar microclimate needs. I'll get into that in a moment as well. We're going to look at our hardscaping and any patios or paths or walkways, even the driveway that we might need to install or renovate. We're going to use permeable surfaces whenever possible, because this is really going to benefit the health of the garden by allowing moisture to percolate into that soil. Whenever we do get rains, that water then can now infiltrate and recharge the soil system around our properties. We're going to use compost to increase the health of the soil and mulch to help protect that soil. And we're also going to take advantage of some tools that are readily available at our local garden centers and home improvement centers, such as shade cloth, anti-transparents, and hydrogels. Next. So as the program manager for our Water Our World, I always like to introduce the program for those of you that are not familiar with it. We are a program that was designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality. And we are an IPM educational program, or integrated pest management. We work with science-based pest management for the home gardener. You will find our materials in a lot of the local hardware stores, home improvement, and garden centers throughout the East Bay. And we partner with water pollution prevention agencies to help provide information to associates that work at these retailers that sell pesticides, as well as the customers, with the intention to reduce the pollutants that find their way into the waterways. Next, please. And what this means is that I'm just going to back up a little bit and remind all of us what a watershed is. Now, it might seem a little odd that I'm bringing up a watershed, but it really relates to what we're talking about today. A watershed is going to be, an area of, land coming, for instance, from the Sierras all the way down to the Bay Area. It's going to be an area of how water gets channeled. The rainwater and snowmelt gets channeled into the direction that leads to filling up any creeks and reservoirs or rivers, finding its way down to estuaries, and then, of course, the bay. So on the way, because this water is moving over the surface, any of that water that hasn't absorbed into the soil, it's going to be picking up and collecting any debris, any litter, pet waste, pesticides, and other pollutants. And how that relates to our gardens, because I see that our gardens are our own properties, are just like a mini watershed. Whenever we have a rain event, or whenever we have a situation where we have a broken sprinkler, or the sprinkler heads are adjusted a little wonky, where we do have that overflow, where that water is running off our properties, it's also going to pick up those pesticides, so synthetic fertilizers and other pollutants that might be on our properties. So with the intention of protecting our waterways, it's really important to keep our water on site. Any runoff that we might have, any rainwater, any overflow, we want to keep it on site, because not only does it protect our waterways, but it really benefits our gardens in more ways than one. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay. So many of us are familiar with gardening in California. We live in a Mediterranean climate, and out of the 5 Mediterranean climates, we're actually the driest one. So we're really used to what summer dry conditions are. We are going to usually get our first rain, though it could be very small, before October. And here in the North Bay, we already did receive a little bit of rain, which was very exciting. But we are really used to getting the majority of our rainfall in that January, February, March period. So all these practices that we're discussing today apply to gardening here in California, but they also benefit during times of drought. Alrighty. So first I want to talk about our irrigation systems. So many of us have irrigation systems and water our gardens with that nice clock that we can program. I want to remind everyone that these are not set it and forget it systems. It's really important that we're going out, I would say, every season. And to be honest, I've been going out about every month to adjust these controllers to provide water during different times of the year so that we can be watering the most efficiently we can. We really only want to water when the plants need it. Okay, and that's not always easy to identify. We also want to look at converting any of those pop-up sprays to drip. Drip is the most efficient way to water our gardens. The main reason why is because it's making direct contact with the soil, and it's able to we're able to localize that water to provide water around the drip lines of our plants. And we're also, because it's making direct contact with the soil, we don't see that evaporation rate occurring with the sprinklers. The sprinklers, when they are on, a lot of that water is actually evaporating out and not even finding its way to the soil where we really want it. And the best time to water our gardens is going to be those hours just before sunrise. We're really looking at that 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. time period. I know a lot of the municipalities are suggesting 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. because of the water saving potential that those evening hours offer. However, it's best as a pest management, from my lens as a pest management problem solver, is to avoid those evening watering, really leave it to very early in the morning, because in the evening, the moist, cool conditions really favor that of different fungal problems such as black rust and black spot and rust, as well as attracting a lot of pests like earwigs, slugs, and snails. We also know when we get to the end of a dry summer, a lot of critters are also very thirsty because the water is very scarce. So it's not uncommon for us to start to see our emitters and our different sections of our irrigation broken from critters chewing on it looking for water. So with that, I'd like to say it's also a really great time to inspect our systems for leaks. Next slide, please. So I get this question all the time. How often do I need to water? There is a wonderful watering schedule on the East Bay MUD website. Please have a look at it. Next slide, please. However, it is just a starting point. And when we do work off of this schedule, what we want to do is use it as a starting point and then adjust based on observation. And the reason why I say this is because your garden is very unique to your garden, and only you can really identify how much or how often you need to water, because it depends on a lot of things. It's going to depend on the type of plant material you have in your garden and throughout your landscape, as well as the water needs of that plant material once the plant material is established. It's going to also depend on how established that plant material is, because younger plants or plants that are newly planted could take a year to 3 to 5 to become established, depending on what that is. So anywhere from perennials to trees is going to take a number of years to become established. Perennials starting at 1 year, and trees could be as long as 5 years. It also is going to depend on the texture of your soil. Do you have clay soil, which the water will infiltrate a little slower, whereas sandy loam, where that water will infiltrate a little bit more quickly? And then the other thing to consider is, do you have a nice layer of mulch protecting that soil? Because as we're going to learn is that mulch really reduces the frequency of watering quite a bit. And then we're going to look at all those different microclimates that I've already mentioned a bit about, which is the sun exposure, the shade exposure. Is there a nice wind tunnel that comes through sections of the garden in the afternoon? Is there a hot pocket from like the wall from the side of the garage or your house or a fence? And then how is the grade of the garden going to dictate moisture and the transpiration of that water. Next slide, please. So when we water, the goal is to really grow deep root systems and understand that roots are pretty much only going to go where the water goes. So when we can water deeply and help those root systems grow down and out, we are going to be able to really reduce the frequency of how often we water once this plant is established. So we're really able to provide nice deep water less often once this plant is established. Now, when we're favoring shallow root systems by watering shallowly, what happens is that when we have hot, dry periods, such as we experience here in the Bay Area, we are going to, and if our irrigation systems don't match that, what happens is that water in those top couple inches of soil dries out very quickly. And then it, depending on how we have the irrigation scheduled, it could be a while before that plant gets watered again. So it's very important to water deeply and less frequently, not shallow and often. Next slide, please. And we want to understand that soil should not be an afterthought. It all starts with the soil. And the goal here is to increase that the organic matter in the soil to about 5%. That's what we're always going for. And how do we do that? That organic matter is going to be compost, by adding compost to the soil, because that compost not only increases the health of the soil by inoculating it with all of the microbiology, but it also increases the water retention. It really makes that soil more like a sponge, holding on to that water in a good way, which means that we don't need to water as frequently. And that compost also works with the root zone by helping those root systems access water on a molecular level, which is amazing. So compost is a win-win. Next slide, please. So when we can add compost to our soil, understand that we're increasing how much water that can be held. By increasing the organic matter roughly 5%, which is our goal, we're able to, the soil is able to hold water. It quadruples the water holding capacity, which is amazing. So just by adding 5% of organic matter, we are quadrupling that water holding capacity, which is so significant. Next slide, please. And then another important tool that we want to utilize throughout our garden is going to be a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. The mulch that I'm speaking of is going to be a wood chip, some type of an arbor mulch. I'm not speaking about a shredded redwood, oftentimes referred to a gorilla hair, or a shredded cedar. We also want to be mindful to follow the CAL FIRE recommendations of not having any type of organic matter within zone 1, the first 5 feet of perimeter around our structures, our house and fence line. However, mulch is going to be really important to the larger areas of our garden outside of that zone 1, mainly because when soil doesn't have mulch on top. Oh, I'm sorry. Mulch can also be compost. We can also use a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of compost as a mulch as well. But when we don't have any type of mulch on top of the soil, what happens is that soil becomes very dry. And when we do have a rain event, or we do have sprinklers, or we're trying to water by hand, that water is not able to infiltrate or get absorbed into that soil. It actually just runs off. It's going to take a little bit of time for that water to actually absorb into the soil. So when we have a nice layer of mulch on top, then that soil is able to capture that water with ease. Also understand that a nice layer of mulch is going to reduce that water evaporation rate by at least 20%. So if we're looking at saving or reducing our water usage by 10%, well, we've already captured that outside when we have that nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. And then we also understand that mulch is going to help regulate those temperatures of the soil around the root zones, which is always going to be very beneficial for the health of our plants. One key is we always want to keep those stems away, the mulch away from those plant stems. All right, next slide, please. Another way to increase the health of our soils, but also to reduce lawns or weedy areas, is take advantage of the benefits of sheet mulch. Sheet mulch is going to be the practice of laying down multiple layers of cardboard overlapped, and then applying a nice 3-inch layer of mulch on top. Now, this could be an inch of compost and 2 inches of mulch. We can even put an inch of compost under that cardboard with 3 inches of mulch on top. Whatever the recipe of your lasagna is going to be, it's going to do the trick. And then from there, not only are we increasing the biology of the soil and really supporting soil health, we're actually preventing weeds. We are eliminating our lawn, and and there's so many other benefits as well. All right, next slide, please. And then this is also the perfect time of the year to take advantage of planting or adding plants to our garden. The fall season is the best time, and I'll share why. Next slide. We are now starting to see shorter daylight hours. So even though we still might get those hot days, we still could get triple digits. It's not unusual or unlikely. However, those triple digits are going to cool down significantly because of our cooler evening temperatures and our shorter daylight hours. We are hopefully approaching a very nice rainy season. So during that time, the plants can also help get established with the rains that we get. We also are about 8 months until the heat of next summer is at its peak. So we are really moving towards a cool time of the year so that the plants can become more established without the stress of the heat, as well as understanding that we're about 10 months away, almost a year before our next rains, where in about 10 months from now is really the driest time of the year, which is the end of the summer season. So we have a lot of time for these plants to become established in a very successful, positive way, very supportive. Next slide, please. And the plants that we're going to choose we're going to always favor California natives because they adapt to our climate with a lot of ease, and they also support the ecology of our gardens. However, Mediterranean native plants are also going to adapt really well to our summer dry climate. And we're going to always match plants to the conditions of our garden, all of those microclimates that I mentioned before, because this is going to prevent the plants from being stressed and susceptible to pests. And then we're also going to choose disease and pest resistant varieties. There's so many on the at the garden centers nowadays. And a wonderful list of resources for you to find California native plants that adapt really well to our summer dry climate. We have the Bay Area Gardening.org, of course, Stop Waste, the California Native Plant Society, Calscape, our local master gardeners, and one of my most favorite books that I've had in my library for years and years and years is the Plants and Landscapes for Summer Dry Climates, published by EBMUD itself. So check their website out to order your copy if you don't have one already. And then something that's very easy to do that we can all take advantage of. It's a very low impact solution to keeping water on site that brings so many benefits to our garden is by installing a rain garden. A rain garden is a landscaped area that's designed to receive rainwater that runs off of our roofs, our sidewalks, patios, and also any overflow from a rain barrel. This is going to be an area that is going to be installed no less than 10 feet from a structure or your home. And then I also want to share that we are, the goal of the rain garden is to slow it, spread it, and sink it. So we want to take advantage of a rain garden. It's actually something that has a little bit of a divot. It's almost like a very shallow basin. It is not a pond, and we will not construct it like a pond. It is really just a shallow basin that is designed to absorb water, to slow that water down, to spread that water out, and to sink that water in the ground. It's excellent for increasing or restoring the natural balance of your garden and throughout the landscape by holding back and soaking in any rain water that might be running off into the storm drain. Next slide, please. And we want to look at different types of rain gardens that we can add throughout the garden. They could be a bioswale or a rain basin. These are all pretty much the same concept where we're holding onto the water, and we're going to plant these rain basins and rain gardens with California native plants because they can handle winter wet conditions as well as summer dry conditions. Plants for our rain gardens really vary. They're gorgeous. As I mentioned, we're going to favor California natives. We're going to look for a really nice sunny location. We're going to take advantage of these flowering perennials and clumping grasses and small shrubs. That because these are going to not only look beautiful, but they're also going to support our pollinators, our beneficial insects, and again, will thrive in our summer dry climate as well as our winter wet climate. And how to plant. So when we buy a plant from the garden center, we're actually going to see that it is in the shape of this pot, but we're going to take that pot off. We're going to score the sides of the roots. We're going to dig a hole that is the same depth as the pot or the formed root zone. And then, but we're going to have it twice as wide, amend that soil with compost, go ahead and backfill with that amended soil with your native soil, and then add a nice layer of mulch on top. And then we're going to water deeply and thoroughly and let that top few inches dry out before we water again. Now, quickly, let's talk a little bit about how to prepare our gardens for the fall season and strategies for preventing pest problems. So I like to really look at how we can prevent pest problems as opposed to seeing the pest problem and then having to react to that pest problem. So there are some really simple, easy things that we can do right now to prevent a lot of pest problems that we're faced with. One is installing barriers to exclude pests. Also understand that a lot of pests are just seasonal. They're not year round. So we want to understand the seasonality and life cycle of these pests so that we can prevent them before they happen. We're going to adjust our irrigation systems accordingly to reduce the stress of our plants. When plants are overwatered or underwatered, they're stressed and they're going to then be more prone to some pest issues. We're going to fertilize for the winter season, which is perhaps this might be our last time we're fertilizing before the cooler season comes on. We're going to fertilize with a low nitrogen fertilizer. We're going to also go around and provide selective pruning for the health of our plants throughout the winter months. We're going to go around and clean up the garden. Any of those food crops that are ready or they're past their prime, we're going to clean them up. We're going to slow the flow by keeping water on site, as I've shared. We're going to look at planting cover crops. And then again, using sheet mulching for weed prevention and for building soil health. And then fall maintenance around the garden is going to include picking up those food crops. So any fruit trees like apples or pears. We're going to look at those tomatoes, those summer squash, the zucchinis. We're going to look at the cucumbers, whatever we have out there that we have an abundance of. We want to harvest that food or clean up any of the food crops that have fallen, that are overripe, because they attract a lot of pests. We're going to clean up any diseased leaves, such as black spot or rust, because these spores can overwinter and they will affect our plants next year. We're going to selectively prune and any dead or damaged branches that could maybe cause more harm to a structure such as our home or that plant if a weather event comes on. And we're going to deadhead perennials accordingly. Some tools for prevention. These are all going to be barriers to prevent pests from coming in the home, such as this 1/4-inch hardware cloth on the top left corner. That's going to prevent rodents like rats and mice from entering a home. We're looking at filling up any cracks or crevices or gaps with a fresh bead of caulk. Fresh weather stripping around doors will also not only keep the cold air out, but also pests that might want to walk right in. Galvanized metal fittings that can also prevent critters like mice and rats from coming through garage doors or front doors, such. And then screens for the windows, which will prevent flying insects from coming in. And then, of course, a door sweep will also prevent a number of insects from coming in. Other barriers we can use outside would be row cover, netting, gopher baskets to prevent gophers from eating the root systems of our plants, deer fencing, copper tape barrier, which is wonderful at keeping slugs and snails from getting to our plants, and then scare tape. Now, scare tape is not a barrier, but it's a really effective deterrent. So we could put scare tape up on our fruit trees or anywhere that birds are coming in and eating our plants. Other examples of exclusion. This is really very common and it's very normal because so many of us are faced with urban critters such as rats and birds and raccoons getting into our garden beds. So this is just an example of different types of exclusion that I see other folks employing. I think they're beautiful, they're very effective and very easy. And the type of exclusion we want to use dictates what we're trying to exclude. So for rats and mice, we're going to use a 1/4-inch hardware cloth. For gophers, it's going to be a 1/2-inch hardware cloth. They're a little larger, so we can use a little bit of a larger hole on that hardware cloth, which is galvanized wire fencing. Squirrels will use 3/4-inch fencing or poultry wire or similar to prevent them from coming in. And then deer, of course, we need to create fencing, some type of a barrier like a fence that's no less than 7 feet tall because they can jump over that. We're going to keep the weeds in check by taking advantage of that sheet mulch, but when in other areas where we don't have the sheet mulch, we're going to hand pull or remove those weeds at the first site because they can take off pretty quickly. And then we're going to manage these weeds when that soil is dry. It's not healthy for the soil to walk out on there and to pull a lot of weeds when the soil is wet. We're going to mow the weeds or use a line trimmer, which is also very effective. But the most important thing is we want to avoid letting the weeds go to seed. We're going to inspect our drip irrigation systems for leaks. As I mentioned before, we're going to place those emitters around the drip line of the plant. So as that plant grows, we might be adding more emitters or removing emitters and adding more, any type of water source that we might augment. And then we're always going to bring it out at that drip line as that plant grows. is the best place to water plants, not at the crown. We're going to protect any bed that you are not planting. So a lot of us that have food crops, we might have a raised bed that we're going to leave fallow. Well, please take my recommendation to not leave any raised beds or any planting beds fallow. It's very important for the health of the soil to take advantage of cover crops. These are very easy to find around our garden centers, and we can plant them, and they help improve the soil health. They boost the nitrogen in the soil as well as other micronutrients. And they also are wonderful at providing food source for a lot of our beneficial insects and pollinators. And then we're right around the corner from our dormant pruning season. However, as I mentioned, if we do have any whips or big branches that might be threatening a structure, or that might get blown off during a wind event, we want to just trim them now. We don't have to worry about our big pruning until the dormant season, but we want to do any type of preliminary pruning just to keep our plants healthy and to protect any structures on our property. And for more resources for pest management, we have the Our Water, Our World website, which has a catalog of fact sheets that you can reference. Then, of course, there's the UCIPM website, which is just a wealth of information that covers just about any pest topic that you can imagine, with a lot of wonderful solutions. For assistance with pest identification, you can reach out to the bugguide.net. And then for information on pesticides and how the active ingredients work, and alternatives to the more toxic ones, and if we're looking for eco-friendly, less toxic, we're going to go to the National Pesticide Information Center.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne, for all that great information. And just a reminder that, there's no need to frantically be taking notes, because we'll be sending out that follow-up email with the recording, as well as links to most of those resources that were mentioned today. And so we are almost to the Q&A section, and I just wanted to wrap up by reminding everybody about the different programs and services available from East Bay Mud. So you might not be aware, but EBMUD has for many years now, our most popular program is our landscape rebates. So for our residential customers, you can get 75 cents per square foot, up to $2,000, for converting a lawn to one of these water-wise gardens. So if you have a lawn in place, even if you've recently cut off watering, that's okay. You can still be eligible for this rebate. And we actually, during the drought, just upped the amount with our new super landscape rebate. So we've increased the amount to $1.50 per square foot if you are utilizing some of the best practices for sustainable landscape. So you can pick 3 out of these 4 practices, either adding compost to your landscape, sheet mulching to remove your lawn, making sure that you're planting with 50% California natives, and then also waiting to plant in the cool season. So that's going to be the fall or winter, to take advantage of those rains that help your plants get established, so that hopefully you can use less supplemental irrigation in helping those plants develop those deep roots. So we're really excited about this new super rebate, and it's been very popular so far. And as you're preparing to think about your project, you'll want to go ahead and get an application in to us before you start. We'll review your application and just make sure you meet all these requirements, and we're always available to answer questions for you about the process. So feel free to reach out if you have questions about our landscape rebates. And then we also partner with Contra Costa Water District and then local nurseries and soil providers for mulch and compost coupons. These are available for bulk or bags of compost and mulch. And we are just about, ready to open things up for questions. And I saw a lot of questions coming in the Q&A all about compost and mulch. So I thought I would just go ahead and answer those here. Somebody has asked, what is compost? And that's a great question. When we say compost, we're referring to decomposed organic matter. So compost is made up of plant material. It can be weeds, and it's also your food scraps. So you can have a backyard composting bin where you're putting all your food scraps there, adding any of the weeds from your garden, and it will break down over time and be very nutrient rich. It's very rich in nitrogen, and it's used as an amendment for your soil to improve soil health. Or you can compost through the green bins on the side of the road, and you can purchase bags of compost from different nurseries and soil providers. And then when we say mulch, what is mulch? Well, mulch is really going to be anything that you're covering your landscape with that holds in moisture and then also prevents weeds from popping up. And there's a lot of different options when you're looking at mulch. I saw somebody asked, is mulch the same as bark? And they're often interchangeable, but are actually like two separate things. Mulch is often going to be smaller, like wood chips, and sometimes it's even composted mulch that's going to have less carbon content and more nitrogen, whereas bark is really going to be more fibrous, have more carbon, and it's going to be from the bark of trees. But sometimes they are used interchangeably. But we are encouraging folks to use the mulch, and even the composted mulch is a great option there. And then somebody had also asked about rock mulches. So rock is considered a mulch. You're going to be getting a lot of the same benefits. It's going to definitely suppress your weeds, and some people prefer it for the aesthetic choice. But it's not going to break down in the same way as mulch. So you're not going to be adding to your soil health over time. So yes, you could use rocks. There are some instances where that might be the best choice, but we're generally directing people to use mulches for those additional benefits of building healthy soil. And so just to kind of summarize, we've covered a lot of different information here, and we're at the last 10 minutes. Just want to remind everybody about the very beginning of the presentation where we discussed how EBMUD's water supply really relies on snowmelt, and a reminder that we are in a drought. So precipitation, both locally and in the Sierras, has been below average. So water-wise gardens really are a great choice for saving water and helping us reach that 10% reduction in water use. And then fall, we're going into the fall season. It's the perfect time to build healthy soil with sheet mulching, to plant to take advantage of the rains, install a rain garden, adjust your irrigation schedule, do some light pruning, and then prevent pests using a lot of those techniques that Suzanne mentioned. And then, if you are thinking of doing the big switch from a lawn to a water-wise garden, definitely go ahead and get in your application for a landscape rebate. And don't forget to look at our website for downloading those mulch coupons. All right, so thank you, everyone. And there are still a lot more questions that have come in. So I'm gonna take a look at them right now. And I think a lot of them are coming in for Suzanne. So let's see here. Okay, well, we have some questions about plants. And let's see, the question is, I just moved to a waterfront house, the San Leandro shoreline. And we will be sending out some really great, plant resources, because there's so many options for us to choose from here in the Bay Area. But Suzanne, wondering, do you have any recommendations for a backyard garden? Any of your favorite plants? And then if they're choosing those California natives, will they require a special irrigation schedule?
Well, when we choose plants, we're going to do a little bit of research to understand what is going to be the ideal environment that plant needs to grow in, so that we don't have any problems down the line. We also want to make sure we're adding plant material that is not going to overgrow an area or be too small for an area, because we'll either be we'll be unhappy either way. But when something is too big, we have a tendency to have to prune it a lot, which is not great for the plant. It's not great for us, and it's kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. So we really want to make sure we're getting the right plants, the right variety, the right size, and then understand how much water it'll need once established. And again, it really, your soil and your environment is going to dictate how much water, how often, and so forth. We really want to always gauge the water to get down to 5 to 12 inches. I know root systems can grow deeper, but depending on the plants, plants that are going to maybe have a smaller root zone, we'll probably want to gauge that water to get down to about 5 inches. Plants with larger root zones, we're going to get down to about 12 inches. And as far as the shoreline area, I would look at my plant lists for California natives that can handle the salty air. So you're going to be in an area that might be a little bit more windy, and there might be a little bit more salt content in the air. So that's going to also play a part because some plants, the leaves are a little bit sensitive to the salt and will have tip burn, which you also probably won't really like. So just have a look at different types of plants that will thrive in that shoreline area.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Let's see. Suzanne, do you have any recommendations for someone to install rainwater catchment systems? They say that, oh, for someone, oh, they're looking for, I think, a designer. It looks like they did check out the Gray Water Action site,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
nobody worked out. And the question there is, does EBMUD offer rebates on rain barrels? And the answer is no, not at this time. Rain barrels can be a great option, especially as, in the winter, if we're going to be in a drought and you're trying to establish your plants and we have a long period without rainfall. That's really when your rain barrel will be full from hopefully the last rain and can be a good option. But EBMUD does not offer any rebates at this time. We did have a great webinar on all about rainwater catchment, and I'll link to some of our previous webinars in that email for folks. And Suzanne, did you have any recommendations other than Gray Water Action for people to find qualified professionals?
I believe Stop Waste has a list of qualified professionals. I know that the Alameda County Clean Water Program has just recently posted a list of professionals that can assist with rain catchment system installation, as well as gray water, like laundry to landscape installation. So those are, Gray Water Action is really the go-to. And then I would say just having a look at some of the other local resources.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I wasn't aware of some of those, so that's great to know. And then another question along those lines was about where can I find a garden designer for switching my lawn to a drought resistant garden? And there is a local training program through Rescape California. They go over a lot of the different items that Suzanne mentioned today, but in a lot more detail for professionals. And they have a directory actually on their website where you can look for a qualified professional based on where you live. So I'll be sure to also include that link in that email if that's interesting for folks. And then on the EBMUD website, we actually came up with some questions to help you that you can ask a designer to make sure that they are going to be well versed in this type of landscaping, because not everybody is. It does take special training to be familiar with these different, a lot of this is permaculture techniques, being applied to residential landscaping. So you'll want to ask specific questions to make sure that whoever you're choosing fully understands your expectations with your garden. Let's see. Somebody on here said that their neighbors were backyard composting and that it attracted rats. Suzanne, have you come across that issue before? And do you have any recommendations for if you are wanting to compost locally? Because it's such a great way to kind of close that circle of your waste, right? Is your food scraps, then they go back into your garden. But any advice then for avoiding rats?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One, you can, well, first, above all, you want to contain the compost. So you want to build some type of a compost area that is contained. And we build that with that 1/4-inch hardware cloth. And it could be framed out and then that hardware cloth is tacked on. It could be a single composting system or a 3-bin composting system, whatever you'd like. If it's just an open, passive system that is not getting turned and is just getting piled on top of, and it's not really feasible to build a contained system that will prevent rodents from getting in, then it's really recommended that you don't put any food in those passive systems. So no food that goes in there. So it'll only be garden waste. But then keep in mind that over time, rodents do like to nest, and that garden waste can turn into a nice habitat for harborage of rodents. So really having a contained system is going to be the best. Not always what we want to hear, but yeah. And that's floor, ceiling, walls, the whole bit. We want to have a bottom and we want to have a top and a way to lock it.
Okay, good to know. But you recommend not putting food scraps in there to avoid the rats? Yeah. Okay, so that's why, we're lucky we do have those green bins then, if that's the case.
Yeah,
for the commercial compost.
absolutely.
Okay, so we are almost out of time. So I wanted to just circle back to a couple questions about the rebates. Somebody's asking if we rebate artificial turf, and the answer is no, we do not. So artificial turf, you will see water savings from it, but the reason we don't offer the rebate is because you don't get any of those other ecological benefits. It is essentially plastic that you're putting out. And there have been some studies that show it can actually get very hot and contribute to what's called the urban heat island. And then it may actually require water to hose it down and keep it cool. And then over time it will decompose and it breaks into tiny plastic pieces. So, it can be a appropriate choice for certain areas of your landscape, but that's the reason that we don't rebate it. And that's also the reason we don't rebate, we don't allow weed cloths in our rebate program as well. So weed cloths are usually also made up of different types of plastic. And again, it's going to eventually break down into just tiny pieces of plastic that are then in our watershed. So instead of using the cloths for a weed barrier, we recommend sheet mulching. Suzanne had touched on that just briefly, and actually we have a whole other webinar that focuses almost entirely on sheet mulching. Sheet mulching is that technique where you're layering cardboard. That can be cardboard boxes, or it can be actually rolls of cardboard you purchase from a nursery. The cardboard acts as your weed barrier. It's going to suppress everything. It's going to block out the sun, and you'll get those that same effect, but it will break down and actually help add to your soil rather than adding more plastic. So sheet mulching, a lot of different recipes out there, but essentially it's layering the cardboard and then the compost and then the mulch right on top. And with that, we are out of time here. I still see there are some questions we didn't get to, but I'll try my best to, in that follow-up email, include some resources that do address some of those topics so that you can do some more research and feel confident with your fall garden maintenance. So thank you everybody so much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun, and just do look for that follow-up email from us. And then when you close out of today's webinar, a short survey is going to pop up on the screen. If you could just please take a minute to answer that and provide your feedback for us, that'd be great.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.